Someone screamed when a glass burst by my heels, and the rooftop lights stuttered. Music hiccuped like a guilty breath. I turned, and Elise smiled too sweet. Maya said, "Elise, what did you do?" Elise said, "Nothing. Breathe." Jenna said, "Check your phone." The screen burned with messages that wore my name like a mask. Liam said, "This is not what you think." The rain began, thin and cold, like pins on skin. Confetti stuck to wet concrete, bright and useless. Elise stepped in close, arms wide, warmth fake as neon. Maya said, "You promised me forever." Elise said, "I promised you tonight." The crowd shouted cheers that landed like stones. The first time we called each other best friend, we were sticky with lemonade and triumph. Elise said, "We split the quarters even." I said, "We split the future even too." We kept that line for years like a password. We learned each other's tells, the twitch of a grin, the storm before tears. Elise said, "No one gets you like I do." I believed it the way kids believe fireworks are forever. On nights we were scared, we traded secrets like charms on a bracelet. Elise said, "Nothing breaks us." I nodded, even when distance crept in. I needed that promise like breath. We grew into harder cities and sharper clothes, but the orbit held. At a winter party, Liam drifted in like a quiet song. Elise said, "You finally met him." Liam said, "I have heard your name for years." I felt warmth and a warning, small and thin. We talked about late buses and cheap noodles and plans that might work. Elise said, "We should all stick together." Her smile lingered one beat too long. I filed it away with other tiny alarms. Friendship teaches you to ignore alarms until it does not. The missed calls began like harmless dust. Elise said, "Dead phone, sorry." Then the gaps widened. Messages were trimmed to bone. Liam said, "She has been busy." Jenna said, "Something is off." I set my doubt on a shelf labeled patience. Nights stretched thin and loud. I read old photos like prayers and felt foolish. Elise said, "Trust me." I wanted to, because trust had built our whole house. A draft slipped under the door. Small sounds in the dark became footsteps. Back on the rooftop, the chant died in a tangle of rain. My phone showed the thread where my jokes wore Elise's name. Elise said, "We only borrowed what you built." Liam said, "I never wanted this." Jenna said, "Tell the truth." The city roared like a witness who had seen this all before. I tasted metal, fear or fury. Elise lifted the hug again like a curtain. Maya said, "If you cut me, say it plain." Elise said, "I took what I deserved." Lightning flared, and the old promise cracked. The smell of sun-warmed grass still clung to memory. Elise said, "Race you to the oak." I laughed, lungs burning, heart light. Childhood afternoons felt endless, stitched by shouts and scraped knees. We carved initials into bark like it was forever, not just summer. Elise said, "This will always be ours." I nodded, believing the tree was big enough to hold us safe. When fireflies rose, we swore they carried our secrets into the sky. I never thought such light could dim. Every time I return in thought, the roots whisper what was real, and what I only hoped. At 13, secrets grew heavier, but sweeter. Elise said, "Don't tell anyone about Tyler." I said, "Not even the stars will know." We huddled on her bedroom floor, knees pressed close, the hum of an old fan filling silences. Nights stretched with talk of crushes and fears. Elise said, "We'll move away together one day." I said, "Promise." The word felt like a bond stronger than paper, stronger than glass. Even when we fought, silence only lasted hours. Friendship was a lifeline braided from whispers. I thought nothing sharp could cut it. High school hallways carried laughter like echoes. Elise said, "They'll vote us most inseparable." I rolled my eyes but grinned. We moved like a pair stitched tight, finishing each other's lines, defending each other in crowded cafeterias. Jenna said, "You two are ridiculous." Elise said, "Jealous much?" That bond felt unshakable, immune to gossip or envy. When trophies gleamed, we clapped for each other louder than anyone else. I believed loyalty was permanent, carved in stone, and never once thought cracks could start with a smile. Graduation sunlight burned sharp. "Dottie," Elise said, "the world is waiting." Caps flew like startled birds, and for a breath, the future felt wide. Liam shook my hand, a stranger yet to matter. Elise squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "We're in this together, no matter where we land." I held that line against the fear of distance, of choices pulling us apart. Parents cheered, cameras flashed, and our names rang through stadium air. I thought forever was stitched into gowns and diplomas. But even silk tears if pulled hard enough. College nights came with ramen steam and shared blankets. Elise said, "Don't let the city swallow us." I said, "We'll survive it together." Our apartment walls were thin, but laughter carried through like armor. When exams loomed, Elise brewed bitter coffee, and I played music loud to drown worry. We scribbled dreams on sticky notes and plastered them like constellations across our wall. Elise said, "This is the life we built." I believed it was true. It felt impossible that betrayal could bloom in such soil. The morning after the rooftop, the city felt hungover while Elise texted sunshine like nothing broke. Elise said, "Delete the thread, it was a prank gone wrong," and the word prank scraped my ribs. Liam said, "Give her space," but his eyes flinched when I asked why the messages used my jokes. Jenna said, "Patterns matter," and she screenshot timestamps like a detective with kindly hands. I replayed voices in the shower where steam fattened doubt, then thinned into clarity. Elise said, "I hate drama," yet every plan now came wrapped in a fresh excuse and a late arrival. The ringtone chimed and died, like a gull on a black tide. I told myself trust was a bridge, not a trap, and tried walking it without looking down. Somewhere below, wood creaked. At the cafe, Elise pitched my plan to a circle of strangers like it was a souvenir she bought. Elise said, "It hit me last night," and smiled at me the way thieves smile at cameras. Liam said, "It is good," but he did not meet my gaze as if truth were a bright stove. I tasted burnt coffee and swallowed pride like medicine without water. Jenna said, "Credit matters," soft but firm, and a napkin crumpled like a tiny surrender. Elise said, "We are a team," while her hands framed the air around her name. Laughter arrived late, a hired car with tinted windows. I said, "Where did you start?" and her blink was a skipped beat I could almost hear. She said, "Does it matter?" and my chest counted all the ways it did. Snow powdered the sidewalks when I caught them whispering outside the gallery door. Elise said, "Hold this for me," and passed Liam a secret with her eyes. Liam said, "We were planning your party," and the word "your" clanked like a dropped coin. Paintings stared with oily patience, while heat blew dry air into my throat. Jenna said, "Coincidences can be arranged," and tugged my sleeve toward fresh air. Elise laughed, high and easy, the way people laugh when they practice in mirrors. I said, "Call me later," and Elise nodded without letting the nod reach her face. A siren grazed the block, fading like a red thread pulled through cloth. Somewhere a door clicked, and I could not tell which side I stood on. The next week a post from my account praised Elise, genius in language I never use. Elise said, "You left your phone on the couch," and my stomach dropped through the floor. Liam said, "It was harmless," but his shoulders carried weight not mine to lift. I reset passwords and found fingerprints where only mine should live. Jenna said, "Stop giving away doors," and printed a list of locks. I said, "Why does love need a password?" and the room did not answer. Elise said, "Trust me," like a lullaby sung under the sound of teeth grinding. Night pressed its face to the window and fogged the glass with knowing breath. The old oak in memory felt far, its bark a code I could not now read. We met at the river path where wind drummed the railings like impatient fingers. I said, "Tell me what I am missing," and my voice steadied like a blade. Elise said, You are imagining patterns, and tucked hair behind her ear with courtroom grace. Liam said, I should go, and did not. Jenna said, stay, and her eyes held mine as if handing me a compass. I listed the tiny alarms, a rosary of almosts and maybes, beads worn thin. Elise said, you always need a villain, and smiled soft as a trap. The river shoved light back at the sky, bright and cold and unforgiving. I said, then give me proof you are still my friend, and silence answered first. Somewhere a gull laughed, and I finally heard what the sound had always been. The proof didn't explode like thunder, it slid in quietly, a knife against wood, steady and merciless. Jenna said, she used your name to sign the deal, and I felt the oxygen rip itself from the room. Elise blinked once, as though caught mid-rehearsal, her lips parting with a calm that screamed calculation. Liam said, it was her idea, not mine, but his eyes refused to meet mine, and in that glance away, I saw guilt branded into him. I stared down at the paper, black ink scrawled across the page like shadows that had been following me for years. Elise said, it's business, dismissing decades of loyalty with 2 syllables, and she let out a laugh so thin it fractured the silence. My throat ached as I whispered, we were never business, but my voice sounded foreign, like someone else had borrowed it. Silence spread wide, shards of glass across the floor, cutting everything that dared touch it. And in that silence her smile, once a signal of safety, became a weapon of war. The truth wasn't screamed, it was whispered, venom wrapped in velvet. Elise said, you never guarded what mattered. You left the door open and I walked through. My chest caved, years of trust collapsing into dust I could taste. Liam said, I only followed her lead, but each word clanked like iron bars, a confession disguised as surrender. Jenna said, you chose blindness over clarity, her tone a quiet scalpel, sharp enough to cut me open. My lips tried for a question but found only, why? Elise leaned close, her eyes flickering with hunger and hurt, and said, because everything you touch turns golden, and I am tired of being shadow. Her words bled into the air until they stained it with envy. The booth we sat in pressed inward, the cushions no longer soft but suffocating. The hum of neon outside buzzed like a broken nerve, steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. For the first time, the betrayal didn't feel like a possibility. It felt like a verdict, signed, sealed, and irreversible. The puzzle clicked together with cruel precision. The stolen jokes, the missed calls, the knife-shaped smiles, none of it was accident. Elise said, you make loyalty sound like a weakness, and the words were teeth sinking into my ribs. Liam tried, please stop. But his feet stayed glued to the ground, a man paralyzed by complicity. Jenna's whisper trembled but struck true. She's rehearsed this. I turned and saw Elise's expression fixed, as if her face had been carved for this moment, her smirk a blade polished with patience. My heart clenched, dragging up all the laughter, the fireflies, the carved tree, as if begging me not to let go. I said, you were my sister, and the word broke something inside me as it left. Elise's reply came cold, efficient, you should have seen this coming. The air between us became a mirror shattered into thousands of pieces, each shard reflecting a friendship now weaponized against me. The twist unraveled not in shouts but in Elise's cold pride. Elise said, I used you because you let me, her tone a crown forged from spite. The rooftop crowd blurred into noise, their voices static, strangers frozen in their own stories. Liam muttered, she wanted your place, always, and the syllables struck like stones in water, rippling outward with truths too late to stop. Jenna's voice rose, trembling yet sharp, this is the knife, and in that instant every metaphor became literal. My legs weakened, not from the rain but from the weight of every year now poisoned. Elise smiled as though nothing cost her, as if betrayal were currency she could spend without debt. I whispered, everything we built is ash now, and it felt like flames curled around my tongue. The skyline glittered below, not as beauty but as fangs, a city with teeth bared, ready to swallow me whole. Every lie Elise told had been sharpening for this stage, and now the blade gleamed. Elise said, "You never deserved the trust you wasted on me," her voice carved from iron and envy. My body shook with rage, fire that burned cold instead of warm. Liam pleaded, "Stop this before it destroys you both," but his words dissolved in rain, powerless. Jenna whispered, "Choose dignity," her eyes heavy with sorrow, her hands folded as if in prayer. I raised my voice for the first time, not soft, not broken, no more shadows, no more masks. The air itself shuddered. Elise's grin faltered for one fragile heartbeat, then stitched itself back with false confidence. That second told me everything. The strength she wore was borrowed, the mask cracking from within. The twist was complete. The sister I loved had become the enemy I never imagined. Around us, the world felt stripped bare, leaving only the stage and the wreckage of love burning in the spotlight. The bulb swung like a metronome counting down our ruin. Maya said, "Put the knife down," and the air tightened. Elise said, "Make me," and the grin did not touch her eyes. Liam said, "This is madness," but his feet stayed planted. Jenna said, "We end this with truth, not blood." Elise stepped closer, the blade a punctuation. Memories pressed in, oak bark, fireflies, vows that aged badly. Maya said, "You wore my voice like a mask." Elise said, "It fit better on me." The bulb creaked and threw long ribs of shadow. Rage rose, cold and clean, a tide that would not retreat. Maya said, "Then look at me and steal it to my face." Elise backed toward the stairwell like a queen leaving her throne. Maya said, "No more exits," and matched the pace. Liam said, "Let me take the knife," voice shredded by guilt. Elise said, "You already took enough," and flashed him a cut smile. Jenna said, "Doors don't fix liars," and pulled the steel door shut behind them. Rain hammered the roof like a jury's knuckles. Elise said, "You want credit, take the blame too." Maya felt the years stack like wet books. She said, "I bled for us, you invoiced it." The stairwell air smelled of rust and thunder. Elise said, "I learned from the best," and the word best tasted ruined. They burst onto the rooftop, and the storm greeted them like applause. Maya said, "Talk, not spin," voice steady at last. Elise said, "Talk is what made you easy," and let the rain bead on steel. Liam said, "I should have warned her," shame smoking off his breath. Jenna said, "You still can," eyes pinned to him like a compass. Elise paced the neon edge as if measuring headlines. Maya said, "You loved me once," and the word once rang like a cracked bell. Elise said, "I loved the door you opened." Thunder stitched the pause shut. Fire in Maya cooled into edge. She said, "Then face what walks through." Elise lunged, not with murder, but with a dare. Maya caught the blade with her palm and felt the sting like hot wire. Liam shouted her name, a sound that cracked. Jenna said, "Drop it," and the storm echoed her order. Elise said, "Now you have proof," eyes glittering with spite. Blood met rain and thinned to pink threads that spiraled away. Maya said, "I do not need scars to remember," and tightened her jaw. Elise wavered, mask slipping, then set it back on. Liam said, "Enough," and stepped between storms. Jenna pressed a scarf to Maya's hand. The pain steadied her like an anchor. The sky split, and so did the last thread. Maya said, "Give back my name," voice ringing like iron. Elise said, "Take it if you can," but the bravado thinned. Liam said, "Tell her the truth," and looked ready to break. Jenna said, "Say the words," steady as a verdict. Elise stared at the knife, as if it had grown heavier. She said, "I signed it. I stole it. I wanted your life." The storm swallowed the confession and fed it back louder. Maya said, "Then you cannot have me too." Elise lowered the blade and stepped back from the edge. Thunder applauded the choice no one could unhear. Dawn found us in my kitchen where the storm's echo still paced the tiles. Jenna said, "You are not the wound," and wrapped my palm with quiet hands. The cut throbbed like a small drum that refused to yield. Liam said, "I failed you," and stared at the table as if it might forgive him. Coffee steamed between us like a truce we had not earned. I said, "No more passwords shared, no more doors unlatched." Jenna said, "Document everything," and slid a folder toward me like armor. The house hummed with a tired courage learning to stand. Liam said, "Tell me what to fix," and the words trembled. I said, "Start by telling the truth wherever it hurts." The sun climbed 1 inch, and the room remembered how to breathe. We met Liam by the river where the wind kept receipts. Unnamed. Liam said, "I knew pieces," and looked away, and the sentence bent him smaller. The water pushed past like time refusing rewrites. I said, "You were not the knife, but you steadied the table." He rubbed his hands and blinked at the pale sky. Jenna said, "Witnesses matter," and pressed printouts into his grip. Liam said, "I will sign every statement you need." I said, "No saving face, only facts." A gull cut the air and circled once as if counting our promises. Liam said, "I will not fail twice." I nodded and let the river carry what I could not keep. The lawyer's office smelled like paper and endings. Jenna said, "Chain of custody is clean," and set the timeline down like track. I said, "This signature belongs to me again," and the pen sat heavier than it should. Liam said, "My affidavit names every assist," and his voice steadied on the last word. The attorney nodded, efficient as a weather vane in strong wind. Emails launched like arrows toward the board, and the vendor Elise had charmed. I said, "Revoke access and issue a correction." Jenna said, "We cite the contract and the forgery." A clock clicked, patient and victorious. Somewhere inside me, a hinge turned, and the door finally swung true. I met Elise on a quiet street, where leaves stuck to the curb like unsent letters. "Why?" Elise said, "You won the audience," and looked past me at nothing. I held a shoebox of artifacts that used to be ours. I said, "This is your bracelet, and that is my name." She touched the lid, as if heat lived there. Elise said, "I wanted the door, not the house," and her voice failed on house. Wind skimmed the gutter and made a small metallic hymn. I said, "We are finished signing each other's lives." She flinched, then smiled the smallest, saddest curve. The box grew light when she took it, and I turned before the memory begged. By evening, I walked to the old oak that still carried our initials like a scar. The bark had thickened around the wound and made a new shape. I said, "I forgive the girl who trusted you," and the air did not argue. Jenna said, "Healing is not a trophy," and placed a thermos in my hand. I drank and let the heat claim a corner of the cold. The night rose clean and wide above the branches. Liam texted the confirmation that the board corrected the record. I said, "Let it stand where everyone can read it." The wind trimmed the silence to a livable size. The tree did not forget, and neither would I. The courthouse hallway was colder than any storm. Elise said, "I never thought you'd push it this far," her tone brittle as glass. I said, "You pushed first," and the echo stuck to the marble. Liam said, "It's on record now," his eyes tired but steadier than weeks before. Jenna said, "No more shadows," and slipped me a copy of the judgment. Elise's heels clicked sharp like punctuation that no one wanted to read. I said, "We were history long before this ruling." She said nothing, and silence made the verdict heavier. The crowd drifted past, unaware of the funeral unfolding without flowers. We gathered at Jenna's apartment, 4 walls filled with the hum of endings. Jenna said, "Victory never feels like triumph when it costs blood," her voice breaking like thin ice. Liam poured tea with shaking hands and said, "I will spend years paying this back." I said, "Truth is never free, but it's worth more than silence." The steam rose between us like fragile forgiveness. Outside, sirens cut through the city, but we stayed cocooned in dim light. Elise's absence pressed heavier than her presence had. I said, "This is not healing, but it's the first stitch." Jenna nodded and whispered, "Then keep sewing." I walked alone down streets that once held our laughter. Neon signs flickered the way Elise used to, too bright, too fast, already fading. I said, the city feels quieter without lies, but the words carried no joy. Rain misted the air, not heavy, just enough to blur edges. I remembered her bracelets clinking, her promises sharp as glass. Every corner hummed with ghosts of nights we swore forever. I said, you taught me how fragile a vow can be. And the buildings stood as silent witnesses. Somewhere a busker played, and the chords ached like memory refusing to heal. At the oak tree again, I traced the initials that now looked more like scars than love notes. I said, this wound healed crooked, but it healed. Jenna said, scars prove survival, not weakness, her palms steady against the bark. Liam stood back, silent but present, his guilt now softer, less jagged. I pressed my bandaged hand to the tree, and felt the grain push back. Elise's name cut there felt smaller, as if time itself had reduced her. I said, this is the grave of a friendship, and the wind carried it without echo. For once, silence felt like peace. The night closed with a single line, heavier than thunder. I stood at my window, city lights trembling like survivors of their own wars. I whispered, I lost my best friend the day I learned who she really was. The words felt sharp enough to etch glass. No reply came, only the quiet of truth finally spoken. My reflection looked older, not by years but by battles carried under skin. Beyond the glass the city pulsed on, indifferent, eternal. I said, this scar is mine, and it will not fade. Silence folded around me, final, unforgiving, and unforgettable.